When it comes to preparedness and surviving any sort of disaster, there is really no end to all the different supplies that we can have. And on top of that, you've got these survival companies that make these new and improved trinkets and gadgets, these things that will quote unquote save your life in an SHTF situation. And the truth is, nothing beats a good old-fashioned prepping supplies. Get a ferro rod, a Bic lighter, and a little bit of skill. That is going to take you a lot further than some of these trinkets and gadgets, and they're going to be more reliable. In this video, I'm going to skip all the designer tools and all these gadgets and get down to the fundamental prepping supplies that you will need. Also, I'm going to skip the supplies that are specific to certain disasters. As preppers, we think about the large scale events that are possible, but a lot of the times, a lot of people anyway, forget about the things that are more likely to happen. If you think about disasters in a scale of their severity, the more severe the disaster, the less likely it is to happen. So I'm not going to be talking about supplies you would need for an EMP or supplies you would need to survive a nuclear blast. Those are pretty individualized, and you will need to look into those if that is the case. This is more about the supplies you will need to survive any disaster scenario that you can think of, from a personal doomsday, a job loss, up to natural disasters and things that will last from, just a couple days to a couple months. So with that, the first one I have on this list, and these aren't necessarily in order, but this is a fixed blade knife. And in my opinion, and quite a few others as well in the preparedness community, a good fixed blade knife is the second most important survival tool that you can have. And this is because you can make just about anything you need with a good full tang knife and some skill. Now, this doesn't mean you need the most expensive knife either. You just need a good knife. I have a Rat 5 from the Ontario Knife Company, which the Ontario Knife Company is a spin-off of Essie. And this knife was just over $100. It's got good blade steel. It's a full tang knife, and it's a high quality knife at a reasonable price. Again, this is totally up to you. I do have an article over at Survivalist Prepper that talks about picking a good fixed blade knife, and I'll make sure and leave that link in the description below. Like I said, a fixed blade knife is the second most important tool that you will have in your preparedness supplies, and later on I will go over the most important tool, in my opinion, that you can have. So next we have water filters and water purification. Having a water filter and the ability to clean drinking water could be one of the most important supplies and skills that you have in any sort of SHTF or survival situation. Along with the filters, it's also important to have other ways to purify water that you might come across in a disaster situation. Some of these water purification techniques preppers like to use include using bleach. You've got pool shock, you've got water purification tablets, boiling, a lot of different things that you can do. I recently did a video on 10 ways to purify water if you want to take a look and go a little bit more in depth with this. Now, keep in mind, all these water filters and water purification tablets have their pluses and minuses, and they're not all created equal. Picking the right water filter is really important. Some of these are what you call high country water filters, which will get the Giardia and Cryptosporidium out. Some of these are low country water filters, which are a little bit more expensive. The Berkeys, the filters that will get the chemicals, the heavy metals, the things that you might find in an urban setting. So make sure you're paying attention and you understand what your water filter will do. It's great to have these Sawyer Minis or the Life Straws, but if you are in an urban area, that may not be the best water filter for your situation. So they're low cost enough that you can go ahead and purchase one or two, but make sure you're thinking about the higher quality ones too, if that's what you need. All right, so let's move on to the next one, which is fire starting supplies. Now, this is one, when I pose this question to the group, one that gets mentioned quite a bit. Anytime you see, whether you're on social media or in forums or wherever, you are going to see quite a few people talking about fire starting supplies, and for good reason. When it comes to fire starting supplies, there are hundreds of different ways to get a fire started and hundreds of different things that you need to know and understand to make this process as easy as possible. Some of the fire starting ideas are, starting from the very basic and the best option, which is a Bic lighter. You've got Vaseline soaked cotton balls, you've got char cloth, you've got ferro rods, just a number of different ideas and a number of different things that you can do to learn about fire starting. And staying warm is critical, whether you're talking about an outdoor situation or even your home. Now, inside, there are other tools and supplies you can use that don't require starting a fire, but if you have a fireplace or a wood-burning stove, you're going to need to understand how to get those lit as easily as possible. And the great thing about some of these supplies is you can practice right at home. You can practice in your backyard using some of these different techniques and find the one that works best for you. So now we come to first aid supplies and medications. First aid kits and supplies are an important part of everyday life, as well as being important for preparedness. In many survival situations, medical help might not be available, and we are going to be on our own. Also include things like painkillers and over-the-counter medications. These can help with diarrhea, fever, nausea, and also help with some other common issues. So research a little bit and think about some of the over-the-counter medications that might be useful in a shorter-term disaster situation or a longer-term disaster situation. Now, the force multiplying skills when it comes to first aid is understand what makes up a good first aid kit. Don't just go out and buy a pre-made kit. Actually put one together yourself and get an understanding of what you might need. Watch videos, take first aid classes, understand the different supplies that you'll need and the situations that those will be useful in. Again, learn about bandages and wound dressings and how to use all the supplies that you have. So first aid is one of those, regardless whether you're talking about preparedness or not, just something really important to know and understand. Next, we have self-defense and survival tools. Now, when it comes to these survival tools and self-defense, everyone is different. What you are comfortable using really depends on your situation, your physical ability to defend yourself, and what tools you are comfortable using. Some people do not like guns, and I completely understand that, although I think that is probably the best self-defense tool that you can have. I also think it's important not just to have one sort of self-defense weapon, and that could be yourself as well, but multiple different ways. So different types of knives, even a bat sitting by the front door just in case. Pepper spray, bear spray, things like that will give you multiple different options depending on the situation. Not all of these survival situations where you may have to defend yourself requires a firearm, so have the other options available as well. And an important aspect of any self-defense weapon, whether you're talking about yourself or some sort of tool, is the ability to be effective with that tool, whether that's yourself, a knife, or a firearm. Make sure and practice and don't overestimate your abilities. And something that, should be talked about quite a bit when you're talking about self-defense is avoiding conflict in the first place. So learning and understanding how to read people, how to avoid confrontations, what you should do, and when it's advisable to walk away and when that situation comes to the point where you need to actually defend yourself. So that is something, avoiding conflict is probably going to be your best option in an SHTF situation, although sometimes that just isn't feasible and it isn't possible. So the next one here, if you've been into preparedness for any amount of time, is another one just like fire starting that you're going to hear quite a bit about, and that is cordage and wire. This is one of those key survival tools you won't miss until you actually need it. And there are a number of situations where cordage and wire will be useful, whether you're talking about a bug in or bug out situation, or you are at home trying to defend your property. Now, cordage and wire may not in itself be a life-saving survival tool. In conjunction with other supplies, it very well could be. It can be used for fishing and trapping, just so many other things that you won't even really think about until that time comes when you need to use it. Learning about building survival shelters and field expedient water filters. Learning about camp perimeter security, and this camp perimeter could be your home, tripwires, and things like that. Like I've said a couple times, there are just so many different things that cordage is going to be useful for. So as you learn about these, you'll gain a bigger understanding about why cordage is so important. So next we move on to everyday carry items, and everyone chooses to have different EDC or everyday carry tools depending on their personal situation. But the core tools are very similar. At the very least, I think everyone should have a flashlight, a pocket knife, a Bic lighter, a little bit of extra cash, and a multi-tool in your pockets or in your purse if you're a lady. And that, I think, is the bare minimum. And then you build that out depending on your personal situation, where you travel to on a daily basis, the situations you might run into. I choose not to carry a multi-tool on my belt. Some people do. I think a multi-tool is very important to have somewhere around you, whether that's a bug out bag in your vehicle, but I don't necessarily carry one on my person, but some people do. So it really depends on you and your situation. I also have an article over at survivalistprepper.net titled EDC from Head to Toe. Goes into much more detail about this, and I'll leave that in the description below. The next one I have on the list is footwear and socks. And while in the preparedness community, this is pretty much understood, a lot of people sort of take this for granted, especially if you're just getting started in preparedness, because there are just 100,000 different things you have to think about, and taking care of your feet doesn't rank that high on the list. But regardless whether you're talking about bugging out or you're just working around the home, if you can't walk or move, your preparedness plans are shot. So your feet are your engine. Your feet are what is going to make the difference between you getting something done and you not getting anything done. Keeping your feet dry, warm, and healthy is an absolute must in a survival situation. While for most of us, bugging out is sort of a last resort, we don't get to pick when disaster strikes. So if we are at work or we are at school, getting home is a very real possibility. So making sure that you have the right shoes, quality shoes, and comfortable shoes, along with your socks, is going to be paramount in a situation like that. Next, we have survival guides and resources, because let's face it, we can't remember everything. So having some prepping and survival resources available will help us if we can't remember how to tie a knot or apply a bandage or a lot of these different things that might come up in a disaster situation. Now, it's not only important to have these survival supplies, whether they are physical copies or something you've printed out, or even on your cell phone or a hard drive, but it's important to read them beforehand as well. That way, you can reference them in a situation where something like tying a knot or putting a hook on a fishing line, where that comes important, you'll know which book to go to, and it will help you in other areas of preparedness as well. And these guides don't necessarily have to be books that you buy on Amazon either. You can create your own binder with preparedness and survival resources. Like if you find a great website, a great article, you print that off, throw that in a binder. And there are also a bunch of great survival guides on the internet as well. So you can throw those in a binder, throw those on a flash drive. Although if you do keep the digital copy, you're going to need to have a way to access that in a situation where the grid might be down. All right, so moving on to the last couple that we've got here, and this one is cash on hand. While there are some scenarios where cash is basically going to be useless, in most situations it will have some value, especially in the beginning of some sort of event or smaller scale events, whether you're talking about a natural disaster or the beginning stages of a grid down event. Cash will have value initially. Now, the amount of cash that you carry on hand is really up to you, but I suggest make sure it's in smaller bills, because when you need to go buy something and all you have is a $100 bill, you'll either end up overpaying for something or you'll end up buying a whole bunch of other stuff that you really don't need. So smaller denominations is important. If you are bartering, trading, buying, whatever it is, if you have ones, fives, tens, and maybe even 20s, you're going to be better off than having a couple $100 bills in your pocket. Now, like I said, it's up to you how much you have on hand. I personally like to have at least $50 in my wallet in smaller bills just in case. This could be something where there's just a power outage in your city for a few hours and you need to fill up the gas tank, or you need to buy a little bit from the grocery store on your way home. And it could be something that's much larger scale. So I think these days we don't carry much, if any, cash in our wallets, a lot of people anyway. And I think it's important to just have a little bit just in case. Now, the final one here, which is also the most important one, like I talked about with the fixed blade knife being the second most important tool, and that is your brain and mindset. Without a doubt, this is the most essential survival tool and is more important than any supply on this list. The survival tool you have sitting on your shoulder is going to get you through far more situations than a survival knife or a multi-tool or a ferro rod. It's going to be the determining factor in a lot of these situations, how you navigate different scenarios and how successful you are given any sort of disaster situation. And while your brain and the head on your shoulders is important because this is where you're going to store all that important information, all the different things you learn, it's also important because of the survival mindset. It's as simple as the will to survive. Call it grit, call it faith, call it downright stubbornness. That will to survive, that survival mindset is going to get you much further in these disaster situations than having a well-stocked bug-out bag or anything like that. That survival mindset is going to get you through situations that on paper look like you have no business surviving. But having that sheer will to survive and having all that knowledge and everything that we've talked about today to make the tools that you have even more important, I think that makes your brain, the melon sitting on your shoulders, the most important tool that you can have. So that's it for this list, everyone. It's sort of a long list that encompasses quite a bit. But like I said in the beginning, there are so many more areas of preparedness and different supplies and different things that we need to think about. This is not all encompassing. I do think, however, this is a great starting point and covers the fundamental preparedness supplies that you will need. If there is anything that I forgot on this or something that you want to add, make sure and leave a comment below. And like I said, I've got the links to some of the articles I talked about and anything else relevant in this, I'll make sure and leave in the description below. But if you liked the video today, make sure and hit that like button and make sure and hit the notification icon to get notified whenever we do live streams in the future. And if you have any ideas or any thoughts on a video you would like to see me do, make sure and leave that in the comments as well. But with that, everyone, I am done here today. You take care and prepare, and we will talk to you all later.